Okay, I think we're live. Awesome. Well, thanks everybody for attending this first episode of a new Bytes of Innovation season. It's great to have you here. Bytes of Innovation is a webinar series that is hosted or powered by Segmed. Segmed is a company, technology company, that provides real-world data for AI innovators and real-world evidence researchers. So if you're ever in need of real-world data and specifically imaging data, come to Segmed because we can help you with that. Bytes of Innovation is a webinar series where we invite key opinion leaders to talk about the future of healthcare. The idea is there is a 15 to 20 minutes presentation or fireside chat and then followed by some Q&A. So all participants, make sure to put your questions in the chat so that we can discuss these after the fireside chat part. This webinar is co-hosted by Aline and myself. Aline Lutz is an MD PhD ophthalmologist data scientist. She is the Vice President of Clinical Insights and Real-World Evidence at Segmed. And I am Martin Willemink, co-founder and Chief Scientific Officer at Segmed. So we're excited to co-host this webinar. In the upcoming webinar episodes, we will have Dr. Ing Ho, who has an impressive background in the real-world data space. She was the CEO at Veradigm. She was the Chief Strategy Officer and Chief Product Officer at Aetion. She started her own company in the real-world data space, which she sold. And she's also a board director at Segmed. So we're excited to have her on the 22nd of October. We'll have on November 6th, we'll have Dr. Pranav Rajpurkar, who is an associate professor at Harvard, and he also is the co-founder of A2Z Radiology. So that will be an exciting episode. And shortly after, on November 12th, we have Dr. Tim Stick, who is a professor at University of Wisconsin-Madison, and also co-founder and CEO of Rad Unity. So we have some really exciting speakers coming up. But today, actually, I'm very excited to announce that we will have Dr. Matt Lungren here. He is the Chief Scientific Officer at Microsoft Health and Life Sciences. He actually just told me that he changed his position. But anyway, we'll keep it for now as this role. And the goal of this specific fireside chat with Matt is to explore the future of AI in healthcare. We'll talk about foundation models. We'll talk about the role of data in all of this. Okay, so about Matt, he is the Chief Scientific Officer, as I just mentioned. He focuses on translating cutting-edge technology, including generative AI and cloud services, into innovative healthcare applications. He's a physician and a machine learning researcher. He's still affiliated, actually, with Stanford as an adjunct professor. And before Microsoft, he worked as a clinical interventional radiologist and research faculty at Stanford. He actually co-directed the Stanford AMI Center. After that, he went to AWS, Amazon. He did a lot of scientific output. He published more than 200 papers, including work on multimodal data fusion models, new computer vision and NLP approaches, many more topics, all within AI in the healthcare. He served and is serving as an advisor for multiple early stage startups, large Fortune 500 companies. We're actually lucky to have him as an advisor at Segmed as well. Dr. Lungren, his work has been featured in national news outlets. He regularly speaks at national and international scientific meetings, all about AI in healthcare. And most importantly, probably, Matt is the fastest swimmer that I know, and he's at least twice as fast as I am. So I'm always jealous when I see on Strava his times. But anyway, I'm happy to hand the mic over to Aline. And let me also include Matt and Aline to this thing. And Aline, go ahead. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks. Matt, thank you so much for joining us today. So to kick us off, can you please tell us about your background and what motivated you to transition from an academic radiologist to big tech? And also, I just learned that you are still in practice, which is super relevant and cool. So we're curious to learn more about your trajectory.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me on. I believe this is my second appearance. I think you guys had this series way back in was it 2021, 2022. So glad to be back. So much has changed. So we have lots to cover. But yeah, so my journey. Well, there's a long version, a short version. I'll use the shorter version, I think, for the sake of this conversation. But really, it's just been a kind of a journey of exploration. I would sort of put it that way. I think anytime you make lots of changes in your career, I think it's easier to paint a narrative looking backwards than going forwards. I would love to say that I had lots of premeditated, like, oh, I'm going to do this next and this next. That's really just not how it shook out. I think I've really just tried to index on what's interesting, things I enjoy doing, and then trying to find that intersection whenever possible. 10 years as an academic faculty led me to a place where I took a sabbatical in big tech. And I think the aha moment, I think at that point for me was the skills that we build up as clinicians, the skills we build up as academic, researchers are actually super valuable in industry, right? Communication, proposals, communicating difficult topics, thinking about where the frontier is, and then how to sort of strategize about what's coming next. And so a lot of those things, again, play out really well in sort of the quote unquote industry world. And then there's a variety of different roles across industry so that there's never really a dull moment, I think, no matter what you decide to do. So, but again, kind of to your point about practicing, I've always felt, when I look in the mirror, I still see a physician, and I think just kind of maintaining that has always been important to me. And as we'll probably get into, the shortages, at least in my field, in radiology, are pretty substantial. And so I think any opportunity to help the broader community is well received.
There is definitely a shortage, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. First, I think one thing that we are interested in is we're seeing a lot of these transitions from having basic AI models to these foundation models, like much bigger models. And you are actually at the forefront of this development and applying these models in the clinical setting. What is it, before we dive into what these models actually are doing, what is it that attracted you on that space, and why were you like, hey, this is something that I would really do more with?
Yeah, I mean, I think well, there's been several AI healthcare waves. Like you could probably argue that go back to the initial like Dartmouth council on AI, right? Like in the 50s. But technically speaking, I think I would say the deep learning healthcare kind of wave, let's just say 2012, 2013 range, right? With like ImageNet and some of the capabilities there. And then a lot of the work we did at Stanford and folks that from labs around the country kind of started to recognize there's opportunity to apply, particularly in multimodal, these deep learning or neural networks, right, to problems that we care about in healthcare. And I would kind of call that, maybe let's just say 7 to 10 year period from that point, the narrow AI world, let's just say. And I think that we made a lot of progress, right? I mean, you could argue there's several hundred FDA cleared solutions, many of which are in production in various forms. I think at the end of the day, though, we all had a sneaking suspicion something was lacking. In other words, we knew that the analogy I like to use for the narrow AI models is that yes, they're incredibly useful for the tasks that they do, but as a user, it sort of feels like I'm using a GPS that's really good at telling me when to take a right turn, which is helpful. But I do a lot of other things when I drive, right? I take left turns, I go straight sometimes, like, right. So you kind of felt like it's helping you in one or two or three little parts of your job, but there's this broader picture. And so I think, we did a lot of research on this to sort of show potentially the directionality. It looks like you're going to have Dr. Raj Prakar on in a couple episodes. Definitely want to recommend the audience tune into that. But we had put our heads together to think about what could this end up looking like, and let's actually try to break down, at least in the imaging space, the things that we do, and point out that well, hey, there's a lot of things that, yes, we do look for nodules or we do look for cardiomegaly. Yes, those are things, but we also do a lot of other things, right? And there's this long tail of findings that a human expert only needs to see once or twice in training, and then they remember it, and then the Aunt Minnie phenomenon, right? So are we going to be able to cover all those? And I think, colleague of mine, Keith Dreyer, often pointed out during that period that if we play this out, we'd have to generate like hundreds of thousands of narrow AI models to achieve the things that we do as human experts. And that sort of feels not realistic. So anyway, so fast forward to this period now that we're kind of referring to as the sort of the Gen AI or LLM period. And now you're sort of saying, well, listen, I'm seeing all of these tasks in text that can be accomplished with a general model. And so like you could even if you look in healthcare, all of those tasks that require, changing text, transforming text, transcribing text, whatever it is, are pretty much low-hanging fruit now. And that's with a general purpose technology. So that's pretty exciting. I think this, obviously you've seen the reaction to that broadly, and we're going to continue to see that. At the same time, it also begs the question, hey, wait a second, in this new era, we have models that can manipulate both images and text, understand them, interact with them, et cetera. In the general sense, we've all hopefully taken out our cell phones and taken a picture of something and asked questions about it. That's pretty tantalizing to think what that looks like in medicine, right? For the things that we care about in healthcare. And to add to that, I would say that the numbers vary, but 99+% of the quote unquote data gravity, or the data that we have about our patients, is not in text, right? And so like you really need to see how that field is going to evolve for those of us in healthcare in a similar way it kind of did in the deep learning days. So long story short, I think we're at a place where we have a clear line of sight to really start to wrap the tasks and the broader workflows together, leveraging general purpose models, possibly also narrow models together in a way that actually does drive the full GPS solution, to go back to that analogy, right? So now it actually is helping me get to where I need to go. And I'm absolutely positive we're within striking distance of that happening for us in the imaging space.
Awesome. Yeah, that totally makes sense. Going from the one-trick pony narrow AI models to actually having a full, how to say that, like a full broad foundation to be able to tackle real problems. So that's of course much more exciting to work on than just those narrow models. About 10 years ago, Geoffrey Hinton said we should stop training radiologists because AI is going to take over. We're now 10 years in. I think there is only an increasing shortage of radiologists and increasing workload, exponentially increasing workload probably. And we're seeing some adoption of AI, but can you talk a little bit more about where we are actually in the clinical setting with radiology AI adoption, and maybe think a little bit about how will this, like when we do this again in 4 or 5 years, Matt, where will we be at that point?
Yeah, I think that the Jeffrey Hinton quote, yes, I was actually at RSNA the year that he had said that. I was on a panel. I remember being asked, I'm like, oh my gosh, he said that. So it definitely caught a lot of people's attention. Plus there was some early like, wow, they've already done X better than humans, and we can all sort of look back and smile at sort of how that was set up and all those things. But nonetheless, I think that the principle of like not needing the role was obviously insanely premature. And again, it sort of spoke to the divide between those who looked at the I guess the technical aspect of some of the things that we do versus the comprehensive view. And that's kind of how, we've been sort of saying as a community, hey, again, these are useful in certain situations, but they're certainly not to the point where I'm feeling less burned out at my job, or I don't need as many radiologists. So I think that pretty much hasn't played out. It's pretty obvious to say. But it doesn't change the fact that there's a need and possibly a demand, and maybe even increasing pressures to deliver solutions that truly do start to reduce the amount of work that, at least my cognitive work, let's just say, and as a radiologist. And I think that the best analogy that I've found is in the ambient note space. So you've seen a lot of the excitement around the ambient note solutions, which, you can just have a conversation with your patient and you turn to the computer and the note's ready for you to edit and sign. Now, in some cases, it's saving people time. In others, it's, not quite as much. But nonetheless, the reported feeling by the physicians and the patients is that they love it and don't ever take it away from you or I'll quit. That's how powerful that somewhat simple solution is, right? What's the version of that for us? Well, it's probably me showing up to my workday and having, most of my studies pre-dictated, right? Or like as if I had a resident. And there was great work out of Northwestern that was published, I think around May or so, sort of saying this is legit and it can save time in the space of plain films, right? I can show up to my work list and I have, draft dictations on a lot of the straightforward work that I do, which again, huge opportunity for us to the point of saving time and burnout. How do we then get to the point where we're doing more complex things? Well, this is where the data divide starts to really play out, right? Like, do you have access to quality data at scale in order to build solutions that can comprehensively go from image to draft report? Because that's what I think on the clinical side we want. Taking that a step further, there's so much more we can do in that world, right? If we have multimodal models that have a comprehensive understanding of the intersection of what's on the image and the pixels themselves, we can start to really have great conversations with our colleagues in pharma, for example. How would you design a clinical trial if you had imaging biomarkers that were important to your criteria? Well, you could describe them in text. That's kind of hard to do. Or you can actually have the image themselves provide that sort of patient matching or finding. And that's just one of many different ways that this starts to expand into a new world. So again, long story short, I think the multimodal medical space is set to completely take off. I think the pressures of the workforce shortages and the, increasing workloads are going to push us that direction, but also the technology is there. The missing ingredient, I think, right now is data, and the capacity to start to bring that to life.
Well, let's talk more about multimodal models and the challenge with data. So what's needed to train robust models, and how do you balance data at scale, as I said, with the need for curated data sets in your projects at Microsoft?
Yeah, we've done a lot of work on this. Like, we've released open source. We've really tried to focus on open source as foundations. So multimodal models that have, I would call them competencies in different imaging modalities, not just radiology, you have pathology, you have ophthalmology, cardiology, et cetera. Can we have a foundation that gets folks closer to that goal line without having to gather all that data themselves and start from scratch? And that's kind of been the principle behind some of the models that we put out there. All that is to say that there's still work to be done. And one of the things I think you're raising in your question is how exactly do we train these models to do the things that we hope that they can do? And some of that is, okay, do I just teach them what the text and images exist as data today, or do I need to annotate those with additional information? And that's a really important question, I think. And we've seen so much work in what we call the opportunistic screening world, which, for those who aren't familiar, there's data on the pixels, all right, that can tell us information that we as human experts don't say in words, right? For example, a chest X-ray that can get you left ventricular ejection fraction. Well, I can't do that. Like, I don't, no matter how long, if I did another residency, I wouldn't be able to do that. But models can do things like that. So how do we start to bring that in additional insight information in? Well, maybe we can bring in more clinical data as we train these models, not just on the report of what the radiologist said, but maybe on the clinical context, maybe other diagnoses, et cetera, et cetera. So you can kind of see how this can get very, very powerful very quickly. But again, underlying a lot of this work it's going to be data, right? And obviously a use case, but ultimately data to teach these models the things that we can, and even things that we can't yet do.
So are we talking about multimodal and foundation models, or are these two separate projects in your work?
Oh yeah. So just to be extra clear, like, so we've taken a few different approaches to what we would call foundation models, and that term has been thrown around so much it's probably lost meaning, kind of like AI. But at its core is really just how do we pre-train a large model with large amounts of data in an organized way to achieve a given use case. In this particular case, it's the MI2 model or Med Image Insight model. We've pre-trained with large amounts of images and text in order to sort of put folks in a position to get to their goal line much more quickly. Whether you want to build a narrow solution, whether you want to build a complex one, it's a truly a foundation model. Again, that's open source and folks can build on very quickly, fine tune it, whatever. But the point being that we're moving away from that. Here, I'm just going to give you a narrow model that does one thing as a starting point. I'm giving you a broad foundation with broad competencies so that ideally the amount of data and the amount of computer resources you need to train the final solution that you're building is much, much, much easier, lowering that barrier.
Yeah, thanks for making that differentiation between foundation model and multimodal models, because that's of course important. One thing with these newer models, these broader models, what do you think is the role of validation data sets or validation in general, like by regulatory bodies, for example? Because initially it was very easy, right? You have a narrow AI model. This is what it does. You have your statements and it can just be checked. But what do you think is the role now of these validation processes in these kind of models?
Well, I mean, it remains very critically important. I think there's an ongoing dialogue between the community and the regulatory bodies as to how we start to rethink software as a medical device in this new world, right? Because I mean, in addition to some of the non-deterministic aspects of just the pure text foundation models that we have grappled with, I think, as a community too. But then there's also in this multimodal space, like, what is the indication for use? What are you claiming that this model can do? And currently, you still have to kind of shoehorn that into software as a medical device. I think there's been some breakthrough designations that have come through to start to get at a bit more of the broader image to text kind of use cases than some other things. But I feel it's not solved, Martin. I mean, that's probably the final word on this right now. It's just we haven't figured out the best way to sort of present what the models can do in a way that satisfies the sort of traditional software as a medical device criteria across a long tail of possible use cases and frankly error analyses, right? There's things like bias, there's things like distribution shift, all the things that you're and your team is very familiar with, which again speaks to the importance of having insights and eyes on the types of data that you're using to run these tests. We just published a paper called The Illusion of Readiness. I don't know if I can put a link in for you all, but it's we put it on archive, and basically we walk through the common benchmarks that people are claiming victory on for multimodal medical foundation models and showing actually it's really not even looking at the image. And so, for example, a multiple choice question that has an image, it's just using the text stem. And if you remove the image, it hallucinates the answer. So we aren't there yet. We have sparks, as we like to say, beginnings of that, but again, it just has not seen enough real world data at scale to actually achieve some of the things that we know are now possible in the natural image world, the non-medical imaging world.
Yeah. It must actually be exciting right now to work at like FDA and figure out, okay, how are we actually going to do this? Because it's pretty complex indeed. Okay. One last question before we go to the Q&A. And oh yeah, one note I wanted to make, by the way, is these foundation models. At Segmed, we're seeing a big development in these foundation models and a lot of requests for development of them. So if you are developing a foundation model, make sure to chat with us, because we can actually help. This is not to Matt, but because I know Matt already knows where he can get data. But this is to the other people in the audience. Feel free to come to Segmed and talk to us about data needs for foundation models. One last question, Matt, about the clinical effect of these foundation models. What do you think is going to change? Because as you mentioned in the beginning, in the metaphor, like, okay, initially an AI model could tell you have to go right, and that's it. But now with these foundation models, it can be the full GPS, right? It can tell you exactly which way to go. what will the role of the radiologist be in that case if the AI really can do a broad spectrum of diagnosis, detection, follow-up, monitoring, those kind of things?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's still unclear, and I had this conversation with Eric Topol on a different sort of venue, but we sort of talked about how both of us expect that the human plus an AI system will ultimately lead to a better outcome. In other words, the two working together will be better than either alone. We have not seen that play out. Just to be clear to the audience, there has not yet been a definitive study that's shown that human plus AI is better than either alone, which is kind of counterintuitive. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that, whether it's bad UI, poor training, maybe not the right, application or solution, et cetera, et cetera. But ultimately, my view is that being able to have a draft report it's something that we're familiar with, at least in academic medicine, right? Which is when we have a resident, we're going to need to keep our critical thinking brains working, right? We have to be able to edit the output of these models. We have to, critically look at the image. So I think we're still in the immediate term going to have a lot of, use for our human domain expertise and figuring out how those two things work together. Going forward, as those solutions get better and better, there's been work that has shown that there's skill atrophy that occurs. Right, there was a great paper on colonoscopy AI solutions, and then a pre and post on the GI docs showing that their skill set had actually dropped after kind of relying on AI for a time. That's real. I also am not sure how strongly to push back on the leveraging AI because of that. Because in other words, it's like going back to our GPS, which is a good analogy. Do I use a map? No, I don't. I used to have that skill. I no longer have that skill. In medicine, I used to be able to tap out an effusion. There's no way I could do that today. Is it okay that I've lost that skill? I think so. And so I think as a community, we're going to need to decide what skills are going to be sort of parked for now, and then what new skills are we going to need to develop? Obviously, AI literacy being one of them, in order to push this technology to the future and I guess achieve the things that we know are possible.
Awesome. I just asked Aline, can you do the audience question, but we're actually running over time a little bit already. So I think we need to round it up. We don't want to hold everybody up too long. So thanks, Matt. This was really great. I think my key takeaways have been AI in healthcare is shifting from the narrow tools to broader foundation models, multimodal, really more comprehensive solutions. So I think that's very exciting. There's a lot more that will come. So we'll definitely ask you again in a few years to give an update and see where we are at that point. So thanks, Matt. Thanks for the audience. Thanks everybody for attending. It's great to have you. We hope to see you back at the next Bytes of Innovation.